kidogo tu na kutumia link ya YouTube. Ah.
Yeah, so when we get to 500, we start, we are almost getting to 300. So that one should be like in the next 3 minutes or so. I want to believe we shall have hit 500. Today I want to look at clarification of the assignments. And before I clarify the assignment, the things we need to do, so that we know whether we are doing the right thing. This is professional training. The things we are doing today are the things you will do on your own when you go for your practical.
Good morning once again. How are you this morning? Welcome to our class today. I'm sorry we delayed a bit due to some inconveniences, but here we are. We want to get started. May I also receive confirmation from your end that you can hear me? Do that on our WhatsApp kindly. For those ones who have joined kindly, I'm requesting that you confirm on the wall, our WhatsApp wall, that you can hear me from your end. We want to take the shortest time possible because we are late for the lesson. So kindly just confirm on WhatsApp that you can hear me, as we encourage other comrades to join the class. Are you able to hear me from your end? Please confirm that on our WhatsApp. I'm just waiting so that just to be sure that okay, thank you. Nasema tunakusikia. Me, you are saying tunakusikia. Thank you so much. Therefore, today, remember last week, I took you through very important topic on the preparation of teaching and learning. And therefore, today, we are going to look at the methods. Remember, we are just building up from what we learned last time on the preparation. And when you talk about the preparation for teaching, there are so many things that you prepare. In the first place, you have to prepare the documents that will now enable you to begin preparing other accompaniments that will make your class successful. You remember when we talked of the scheme of work and the lesson plan, we said there is a column, there is a place where you have to include the methods and the techniques that you're going to use, the teaching, learning methods. Very, very important, and that is what we are going to cover today, so that as you prepare your lesson plan or even your scheme of work, you know where to place the methods that you will select from, and then the best method that suits that particular class. It is important to note here that the teaching of history and government requires methods that promote critical thinking, evidence-based reasoning, and appreciation of historical processes. Therefore, it is important to note that history, it is both content-based and skill-based. So you as a teacher, you should endeavor that when you teach, you address, of course, the cognitive, that is the mind, the understanding. You have to touch on the affective, the attitudes, then the psychomotor. Of course, learners should be able to make use of the psychomotor skills. And therefore, an effective pedagogy, when you talk about pedagogy, we are just talking about the methodology of teaching, should emphasize on the following. It should emphasize on the development of historical knowledge and understanding, which is the content bit. Very, very important, that the knowledge, and then acquisition of historical skills, the analysis, for example, interpretation. Since history is supposed to be chronological, we want to see the bit of chronology and even empathy. Formation of civic attitudes and democratic values. that by the end of learning history and government, the learner should be able now to demonstrate democratic values. Yes, the learner should be willing to participate even in elections, show loyalty, obedience to the rule of law, among others. Engagement with sources and evidence perspectives, learner-centered instruction. So it's important that as we begin this topic again, we have to get to know, conceptualize the key terms that we are going to use. Because then when we talk about the methods, what are they? When you talk about the techniques, what are the techniques? And when you talk about the strategies, are they different in a way? It's important that we now define these terms as we use them in our study today on the methodology of teaching history and government. We are going to begin with the first term, which is methods. And when you talk about a method, it refers to the broad and structured ways or approaches. So it is the approach that the teacher uses to organize the instruction and deliver the content. Okay? In other words, we can also just say that the pathway. So which pathway are you going to use to deliver that content? Then that one can be referred to as the method. It is an approach, it is a pathway, okay? And therefore, such methods include, you can decide as a teacher, for example, today I'm using the lecture method, which is online. So, and then you can decide that maybe if you're teaching, we want to use discussion method or project method or even inquiry method. So that approach that you are going to use in order to deliver the instruction or deliver the content to the learners is what we are calling the method. When you talk about techniques, a technique refers to a specific or practical steps, actions, or procedures the teacher uses within a method to achieve learning objectives. Now, you see, we have said you have to begin with identifying the method, and the method is the approach, the pathway that you are going to endeavor on in order to deliver that particular content. But when you talk about a technique, we are talking about the actions that you'll do within that particular lecture, for example, which is a method now, okay? And therefore, the steps that you take in the method or in the approach of teaching, then that one is called a technique. For example, if, for example, I'm teaching using the lecture method, I'll reach a place where I'll be maybe asking questions to you. So that the art of asking question is what is called the technique. Okay? I might reach a place where I can narrate a story. So storytelling or the narration is the technique within that method. Okay? So let us not confuse those words. When you talk about the method, you are talking about the approach or the pathway that you're going to use to deliver the content. But when you talk about a technique, is that practical step or action within that method that you are going to use in order to achieve the learning objectives. If, for example, I'm teaching on the methods of teaching history and government, and I'm using the method is lecture method, I can decide if my objective was that by the end of this lesson, the learner should be able to mention different methods used in the teaching and learning history. In the process of teaching and using the method of lecture, I can decide to use probing questions within the lecture just to know whether you can be able to mention, to list, okay, to list the methods. And when you list, Yes, I'm using the questioning method, the questioning technique. Okay, so that becomes a practical step or action I'm taking in order to ascertain if you have understood what I'm teaching. So, what about the strategy? We talk of the teaching strategy. What is a strategy? A strategy is an overall plan or design that a teacher uses to combine methods, techniques, and resources to achieve a desired learning outcomes. So strategy takes into account the learner's characteristics, the content of the objectives, and the learning environment. Okay? For example, you can adopt what we call the learner-centered strategy, the cooperative learning strategy, direct instruction strategy, inquiry-based strategy. So a strategy is a combination of a multiple of ways or methods you want to use. And that is why we are now combining the method of teaching, the techniques, the actual steps that you will undertake, and then the resources that you intend to use. So while all these ones are combined, then, for example, you can now decide that I'm going to use, for example, a learner-centered approach or strategy. Okay, so a strategy, the techniques, and even the resources that I utilize in that particular lesson. In simple terms, we can say that a strategy is a master plan, okay, for for organizing, teaching, and learning to meet the set goal. So the master plan, within this master plan called strategy, there is methodology, there is the methods, there is the techniques, and then there is the resources that the teacher intends to use. Up to this level, we have been able to define the three terms that when you talk about a method, it is an approach. When you talk about a technique, it is a procedure or an action that the teacher takes in that method. And then when you talk about a strategy, it is a master plan. You are combining the method, you are combining the technique, and even the resources that you intend to utilize in that particular lesson. So let's move on and look at what are the factors that will influence the choice of a method. We have just, for example, mentioned them in a nutshell. What will prompt you to choose a particular method? Because there are so many methods as you're going to learn. But then, what should you consider as a teacher of history to when selecting a given method? One is a learning objective. So if you want to test the knowledge, the skill, the attitude to be achieved, then if it's about the skill, then that means that that particular that method should be learner centered, so that the learner is hands-on to develop the skill. Okay, so the learning objective will determine content characteristic is another one, whether it is an abstract content, a factual one, a controversial, chronological, conceptual, skill-based will also determine. Learner characteristics in terms of age, okay? So you cannot use, for example, lecture method to teach a daycare or a PP1, okay? It depends the age of the learner. The prior knowledge, the knowledge the learner has acquired prior to this lesson that you want to teach, the abilities of these learners, motivation, learning styles. Okay, resources available. For example, we are going to learn in the next topic we are going to learn about the resources that you are supposed to prepare as a teacher. So even the resources will also dictate the type of method you will adopt. Time available will also the class size is another one. Large classes often require more structured methods because you cannot now engage learners on one-on-one. So you cannot engage so the class size will also determine, you can imagine a class occupying auditorium C. Yes. So which will be the best method for you to use? I'm teaching the second year as a common unit. And when they turn up for a physical class, they will feel maybe the entire auditorium B. So which method are you going to use to reach out to all of them? Teachers' competence and experience, so the master of the method and comfort level. Some teachers might not be willing to maybe use the project because either is not comfortable or has not mastered the method, and therefore will maybe opt for another one, which best suits his mastery of content or methodology. School environment and the culture also. So if you find a supportive school where there is innovation of different methods, availability of field trip funds. For example, we have uh, schools that will really encourage field trips, where if you propose as a teacher, a subject teacher, the school will do an allocation to you so that you can take the students on the field trip, which is a very good method to use. But you see, some other schools you'll be told the learners cannot afford, and therefore you opt for the method that best suits that particular lesson. The ICT facilities in some schools, they have well-established facilities, and therefore, instead of maybe sitting in class and lecturing students, you can decide to make use of the ICT facilities. If you can run a documentary, for example, instead of teaching, you decide that in that particular class, the method you're going to use is maybe the running of a documentary. So that one will do. So it depends with the school and the culture of that particular school. So we want to look at the major methods and techniques of teaching, history and government. We are going to look at the lecture method. When you talk about the lecture method, this is where it is a teacher-centered approach where the teacher verbally presents information while learners listen and take notes. Which I'm using this morning. I'm using the lecture method where you as a learner, you are seated there listening and you are taking, for those ones who are able to do that, but I know others are just waiting for Daktari to share the notes. But it's important that you also take notes of a summary of what we are learning. So that is a lecture method. So it's useful for introducing new topics. For example, if you want to introduce a new topic, you want to summarize complex content or covering vast content within limited time, you can use the lecture method. efficient for large classes too. So what are the advantages of using the lecture method? It will save time, which is also now economical. It is effective for structured delivery and syllabus coverage, provides clarity and coherence in presenting historical events. But what are the limitations when it comes to the use of a lecture method? Learners may become passive listeners. For example, now I know some of us just maybe join the meeting, join the class, and they are busy doing their own things. Okay, so learners, but if the teacher is in class, learners will be there seated and listening or just gazing at the teacher. There is limited opportunity for critical inquiry and interaction. For example, you see now the method that I'm using today, we don't have that direct interaction. Yes, unlike the Zoom that we used to have sometimes back, where I'll also give you an opportunity to ask questions directly, and we engage in like a debate forum. So this one is also limited in that manner. So difficult to check learners' understanding continuously. For example, when I teach the way I'm teaching, it is at times a challenge to get to know your level of understanding. It's until when I'll be giving a cut that I'll be able to maybe gauge your level of understanding. So if you opt to use lecture method, what are the structures that you have to put in place for effective use of a lecture method? So if you are using a lecture method and you want to be very effective, use short, well-structured main lectures. So your lectures are supposed to be well-structured but short. Incorporate questioning and storytelling, maps, visuals, anecdotes. So these ones, all of them, if you can even, of course, adopt storytelling in the process, it also um, uh, arouses learners' attention to you. So instead of just lecturing where learners will now become bored, especially the young ones. So you can, of course, adopt within this lecture method to bring on board storytelling. So you can provide guided notes or outlines, allow periodic the way I'm doing, so that as I teach, you are able also to read what I'm using. So provide guided notes or outlines, then allow periodic reflection breaks. Then the second method we want to look at is called the discussion method. This is a learner-centered method where learners actively exchange ideas guided by the teacher. So when you give a discussion, for example, in class, you don't now say, can you discuss on your own? These discussion groups are supposed to be teacher monitored. The teacher must be there to oversee what these learners are doing in those groups. And of course, you have to guide them, okay? Interrogate them, see how they are doing, okay? Because some learners will pretend to be in a discussion, and they'll be engaging in their own thing. So just make sure that you monitor. So they are used for the following purposes: to develop, for example, critical thinking and communication skills, because with the discussion, every learner will be given an opportunity to communicate his or her ideas. It encourages participation and ownership of learning, whereby the learners maybe after discussing, they'll be able now to make their own presentation. This makes the learners to own the learning process, okay, because they are actively participating. So the types of discussions that you can use include the following. You can use whole class discussion, where the class is actively engaged in a particular discussion. You can decide to use small group or bars group discussions. You arrange them, for example, in groups of 5 or 10. brainstorming, panel discussions, or even debates. So those are the kind of discussions that you can use. What are the advantages of this particular method? It promotes learner engagement because now learners are actively engaged in the learning process. Yes, they can be able to share their ideas. It enhances reasoning, analysis, and argumentation because within that particular group, discussion group, these students will share their varied opinions about an issue. And what happens is that they will argue out until they reach a consensus. Remember that after the discussion, the teacher, if you want it to be very effective, the teacher will allow these students to make presentations. And therefore, this one helps them to argue out, reach a consensus so that they can do what? They can present. It also accommodates multiple perspectives on historical or political issues. What are the limitations for the use of this method? It is time consuming because you have now to arrange these learners into groups. They have to discuss, agree before they now present. This method can go off topic because within that particular discussion, some learners might start their own things within if the teacher cannot effectively manage this group discussions. So there is also the idea of dominance, whereby those ones who are very, very active, or we can say in quotes, the bright ones, will be able to do what? Will be able to dominate dominate the class, the groups, okay? And therefore the teacher is supposed to closely monitor those discussion groups. So for the better for the betterment of the use of group discussion, these are some of the guidelines that will help you have an effective discussion group as a method of teaching and learning. So make sure that you also prepare, as a teacher, you prepare guiding questions which will guide the learners in the discussion. You can set clear rules for participation that you can only, for example, contribute once and allow another member of the group to participate so that you to avoid monotony. Organize groups strategically, for example, in groups randomly in groups of 5 or 10, okay? Then summarize key points at the end. So you don't now just leave the learners to discuss and then you say that is the end of the lesson. A good teacher will make sure that by the end, the learners will be able to present, but the teacher will now summarize and guide the discussions. Of course, now providing the way forward from the discussions. Another method, which is the third one, is called questioning technique. For example, this is a technique where you now use to question, okay? So differentiate between the method and the technique. Questioning is a technique, and this is where you can use a structured or spontaneous questions to stimulate thinking, assess learning, and focus attention. So the types of questions, for example, that you can use are what we call closed versus open-ended, okay? So you know the closed-ended questions and open-ended. So open-ended allows more explanation, but closed are usually confined and maybe just one word answer, okay? Then we have what you call recall on knowledge questions, where you just want learners to remember what they learned. Then comprehension questions, application analysis and evaluation questions. This is one of the highest order, uh, of course, in the Bloom's taxonomy. Then the Socratic questions. Socratic questions are those questions that are open-ended in a way whereby the learner argues out to reach at a conclusion on his own. It is not a leading question. So this question that allows the learner to think and of course logically and reach at the conclusion, then that kind of a question is also called Socratic question. It's almost similar to open-ended, okay? But now this one allows the learner to argue out, think logically, and reach a conclusion without being aided. So what are the advantages of using the questioning technique, for example, in the process of teaching? It enhances active participation because now the learner, it's the teacher and the learner engaged in the process of questioning and answering. It encourages critical thinking, for example, the Socratic questions that will allow the learner to think logically and present his ideas. Okay? Then assesses prior knowledge and ongoing understanding. You see, for example, you enter into a lesson and you want to check if the learners were able to master the previous content. So you can now say, ask them to maybe just record what they learned in the previous lesson. And then as that one allows the prior knowledge, the testing of the prior knowledge. And then in the process of teaching, you can be able to ask questions so that to ascertain whether the learners are understanding the content you're teaching or not. So effective questioning skills include the following. So you ask a clear, relevant, and well-phrased questions so that the learner gets the question at once. So use adequate or wait time, 3 to 5 seconds. Give them time to respond. Okay? Not like during our time, the teacher before asking the question will start beating you for not answering the question. Okay? Those are our times that the teacher is in the process of asking the question and is already beating you up for not answering the question correctly. So make sure that you also give the learners time to respond. Okay? Probe and redirect the deeper understanding. That, for example, the learner will answer, you'll probe a question to the learner will respond, and maybe according to you, the learner has not responded well. So you can add up another probing or a secondary probe to allow the learner to dig deeper and so that you can test the understanding of the learner on that particular topic. So encourage learners to ask their own questions. So as a teacher, it is important that after teaching, you don't just walk out of the class. As you question them, also allow them at the end of the lesson to ask questions where, and even in the process of teaching, to ask questions where they're not understanding. Okay? Yeah, so that it's not like during our time when you could not dare ask a teacher a question. It is the teacher questioning the learners and not learners questioning the teacher. So storytelling is another method, and how I wish that by the end of this, please do separate the methods and the techniques, okay? So storytelling or narration as a method of teaching and learning history, this is where there is the use of vivid narratives to convey historical events in an engaging and memorable manner. So you have to, of course, in the first place, know the story so that you can tell the story. Okay? It is of educational value because it humanizes past events. Instead of just reading, if you can narrate, then it makes what happened in the past to be human, okay, to be real. It also develops chronological understanding and historical empathy because now you have to walk them through. For example, if you want to narrate about the post-election violence in 2007, and you want to walk these students through the process of post-election violence and its aftermath impact. So as you walk them through, it brings about how did it start? What prompted, for example, the post-election violence? So what happened immediately, and how was it the cause and effects? Okay, in history we learn about the causes, the causes and the cause, and of course now the effects, the aftermath. So as you do that, there is a chronological understanding of things, okay? Then enhances retention because now this learner will also develop the desire to retell the story to other other people or other learners somewhere. So this one enhances retention. So if you wanted to be effective, then make sure that you use accurate and factual stories. Okay. If you're not sure about a given story, then just welcome somebody to yes, an expert to do that. Okay. Then integrate visuals and timelines, relate narratives to learners' context. For example, the Kenyan independence struggles encourage learners to retell or create historical stories. So after telling them the story, you can now say that at the end and say, who can retell that the story that I've just shared, narrated to you in 2 or 3 minutes, just to test the level of understanding and the memorization of the learners, if they can be able to also narrate what you have told them. That one will help you to gauge the understanding of these learners. Then role play